time for part 2. Don't forget to check out the first one, and let's go. Fusako Shigenobu, or some of you might have seen this photo of her before. I truly can't imagine this is one of your guys' waifu. I mean, am I right? Regardless of that, she is the founder of the Japanese Red Army, which is similar in ways to the Red Army faction in Germany, of Ulrika Meinhof. They were most active in the 70s and the 80s, operating mostly in the Middle East, but the plan is to overthrow the Japanese government and the monarchy. But before she created the Japanese Red Army, she did join the Red Army faction in Japan, but the Red Army faction in Japan split off and created Japanese Red Army and the United Red Army. And same thing with any Red Army faction, they are a neo-Maoist one, focusing mostly on guerrilla warfare. The idea is to create a cost for capitalism, sort of make it so costly to have a capitalistic system so it will implode upon itself, creating the opportunity of creating a communist state after the failure of the capitalistic state. Fusako is still alive today. She's 80 years old, born 1945. She dedicated her entire life with the idea of this. For example, when the split-off happened, she started working in Tokyo's hostess clubs because of her immense beauty. And all the money she made there she put directly into the Japanese Red Army. The split that occurred has a lot to do with how they viewed the Japanese New Left and how they didn't really want to focus on a path to world revolution. That's why later they start joining up with Palestinian causes or different liberation movements in the Middle East, because there she would find opportunities for a world revolution. Arab media has covered her pretty decently. I'll give some quick tidbits of what she was doing in the Middle East. She started working for the Al-Hadaf magazine, where she will be able to explain to the Japanese people about the Palestinian cause and the struggle they're facing. The Japanese Red Army in the Middle East was part of a machine gun and grenade attack in the international airport near Tel Aviv, killing 28 people, and 2 of the terrorists were killed. Because of this event, she was brought underground. There were claims that the Israeli government was trying to assassinate her. At this point, she was pregnant with her daughter, was born in 1973, and she lived underground for 28 years after that. She conducted several operations against capitalistic imperialistic entities, such as Shell in Singapore, the French embassy in The Hague, and the US consulate in Kuala Lumpur. She was arrested in Osaka in the year 2000. She was charged with 2 counts, one of passport forgery and one of planning the 1974 hostage-taking operation in the French embassy in The Hague. She got sentenced for 20 years in jail, and the group dissolved. Vladimir Dvornikovic. Who cares about this man? All my Yugoslav umfis be like, yippee, Yugoslavia, I love Yugoslavia, more Yugoslavia. I mean, who is this man? He's a very strong proponent of Yugoslav ethnicity. How is he comparable to like a mass murderer like other people in this damn list? I want these men on list because I love Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia #1. To not leave you completely empty-handed, I guess, he wrote the book Karetiologa Yugoslavinia, Characterology of the Yugoslavs. He more or less wanted to create a unified ethos of the Southern Slavs, of the Yugoslavs, by comparing them to the generic race. He's more or less clumping all the Southern Slavs into one racial group or racial characteristic. Rudolf Steiner. For people unaware, this is the biggest person in this entire 20 list of people. I can talk about him for hours on the influence he had, his crazy theories. So I'm gonna pick just a few different things that I find interesting about Rudolf Steiner and discuss that.
We can no longer look in retrospect, in memory, at our youth, at our childhood, the way people once looked at their youth and childhood. Anyone who has carried out a certain inner biographical research can definitely say this. When we look back in this way, what is it that does not arise from this childhood, from this youth? What is missing is something that fills us with joy, with enthusiasm, with initiative. Something that gives us strength from a time we have lost outwardly, but which could be within us, fueling us inwardly, strengthening us within. This is expressed radically, but in a certain sense it is the case. As adults of our age, we have largely lost our youth, our childhood. And this is particularly evident in the fact that, if we now take a closer look at social life, as adults we find it so difficult to come to terms with young people.
This is an excerpt from his book, Becoming Fully Human. I listened to the audiobook of this about a year ago to sort of understand parts of Rudolf Steiner's concepts. Not the mystical, Gnostic, theosophical, whatever, but more his everyday philosophy. Now, I strongly disagree with this, but a lot of people don't. For a lot of people, this is truth. The idea of this is called anthroposophy. The idea is we are smarter as a human, we're more connected to our humanity when we are a child. So allow children to be children. And as an adult, do not lose the connection to your childhood. And some of the listeners might have been in certain schools called Waldorf schools. And the idea is to allow kids to play, to have fun, to explore. It's much more open. It's not very strict curriculum. They have to learn, obviously, certain aspects. But it's very popular for more open-minded individuals, if I say that. In the world, there's 1,200 schools of Waldorf and over 2,000 kindergartens. This is very popular. And I've even had arguments at random when people tell me how smart the kids are, how more honest kids are, how more connected to reality kids are than adults. And I always go, whoa, calm down there, Mr. Rudolf Steiner. That's silly. The idea is with all the rules and social norms that exist in society, we are trapped. We can't open up spiritually to the world and be what we fully are. Dimitrije Mitrinovic. If you're any type of Serb nationalist, you know this man. Also, just to point out, I was trying to understand the pronunciation and Google Translate asked if it was Bosnian. So true. And if I say to you that I interacted with this man before, that's also something crazy. That's true. And who knows, I might be sent to the damn Revolver magazine in Russia again if I talk about this man. So Dimitrije was a Serbian futurist. He traveled a bit all over the world, wrote for different magazines and papers, was part of a movement called Young Bosnians. He wrote a Serbian Futurist Manifesto. He was put in the Serbian embassy in the UK. And yeah, I mean, there's not much really more to him. He's like a cuckoo crazy Yugoslav futurist. Enjoyable. As I thought I was done with this man, I find an article calling him an unrecognized prophet of a united Europe and mankind. What are these Yugoslavs smoking, bro? His most influential initiative was the New Britain movement in the 1930s. One of the followers of that period was Alan Watts. The first was the concept of a social credit explained by Major Douglas. The second was a guild socialism with workers as stockholders in the company employing them. The third was the application of Rudolf Steiner's concept of the threefold state, which would include three assemblies, political, economic and cultural. And the fourth was the campaign for an intermediate federation of all nations of Europe. When Hitler came to power, Dmitri wanted to stop him. The New Britain movement invoked the government of England and France to use force, if necessary, to prevent his refortification of the Rhineland in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, and it would have worked. Yukio Mishima. What can I say that hasn't been said about Mishima thousands of times? I mean, PewDiePie has talked about Mishima. A Japanese ultranationalist who tried to do a coup d'etat and failed and committed seppuku. And he's an amazing Japanese writer. Shall we read Sun and Steel then? Refusing utterly to recognize the conditions of my own existence, I've set about acquiring a different existence instead. Insofar as words, by endorsing my existence, had laid down the conditions for that existence. The steps it was necessary to take to acquire another existence involve flinging myself bodily on the side of the phantom evoked, radiated by words. It meant changing from a being that created words to one that created by words. It meant, quite simply, using subtle and elaborate procedures in order to secure the momentary shadow of existence. It was logical indeed that I should have succeeded in existing only at one solitary, selected moment of my short army life. The basis of my happiness obviously lay in my having transformed myself, albeit for only a moment, into a phantom formed by the shadow cast by fat-off, mouldering words from the past. By now, though, it was not words that endorsed my existence, This type of existence that derived from rejecting the endorsements of existing by words had to be endured by something different. That something different was muscles. Muscles! Page 87. How I longed for this, how intensely I've looked forward to this moment. Behind me lays nothing but the familiar. Before me lays the unknown. The present moment was the thinnest of razor blades between two states. How impatiently I had waited to fulfilling this moment. How I've yearned for it to come under conditions as strict and alloyed as possible. It was for this, surely, that I was alive. How could I fail to feel affection for those whose kindness had made this possible? And that is Mishima. Jan Wacław Machajski, a Polish Pol Pot. Now, I gotta say, this person is very interesting. The reason for the Pol Pot commentary is because he's very anti-intellectual. He himself, an absolute genius. He just sucks up books like knowledge in his head. He defines himself more as a Jacobin more than anything else. He started his younger career with the Polish Socialist Democratic Party of Galicia, after illegally transporting himself to Galicia. Tried working with the powers that be until he got arrested and sent up to Siberia. And at the time of his exile, he took any book that he could with his friends nearby and just ate up all theory he possibly could eat up. And reframed something very differently, wrote different books even in exile that was spread throughout Poland. The earlier book is called The Intellectual Worker, which is a commentary on the intelligentsia in Poland or in the world, in the workers' movement. And mostly a commentary against Edward Bernstein, which is a German social democrat, and someone named Sturuv. In the text he noted the role of the intelligentsia in workers' movements. Thanks to his publication, people found out where he was imprisoned and paid his bail, which is 500 rubles, to get him released in 1901. To summarize his ideas, because I can go in a bit on this one, it's actually very interesting what he's bringing up, is the shared goal that both the worker and the intelligentsia have towards this sort of Marxist end goal, but that in a sense they're actively working against each other, especially intelligentsia and the working class, because he views a lot of the intelligentsia as sort of semi-bourgeois, part of the same cultural elite that exists in the capitalistic society that is inherently also pushing down the working class, with the concept that the working class isn't intelligent, isn't capable of learning. So a lot of the white-collar workers are getting paid more because of their sort of cultural belief that they are smarter and more capable and the work are more important than a person working in a factory. So the exploitation is very different depending. They're both important and shouldn't be completely removed. Intelligentsia should have an important role, but not in the same magical dreamy version. And they should be paid exactly the same and have the same status as a factory worker. Because in a sense, they're already taking advantage of the laborers' work by the food that they bring in, clothing, the housing that is done by other people's labor so they can write. Jun Tsuji. Jun is another very fascinating character. I might do something larger with this guy also in the future. He's a vagabond, he's a materialist, he's an egoist. The way I describe him is from what I've read and see. He's a man of simple living, but the hardship of childhood decided to go into the readings to a different world, but then seeing that life doesn't have to be that complicated. You can live in the material quite simply. Focus on the world around you. Be content with things around you. Write not for the money, but for the expression. Be one with your ego. He is the first Dadaist translating a lot of works into Japanese, but spending a lot of time with Japanese feminism. Jun Tsuji, if he saw himself living in the Soviet Union, he would most likely have been shot to death. In his 50s, he spent some time in a psychiatric hospital because of the Tengu incident. Jun Tsuji climbed to the second floor window and began flapping his arm, crying, "I am the Tengu!" Eventually jumping from the building, running around and jumping onto the table, calling, "Kia! Kia!" But it was in the end part of World War II, where the vagabond lifestyle was no longer really possible. A friend set him up in a one-room apartment in Tokyo, and he died in there of starvation. Italian unabomber. He has no politics. There's no political motivations behind any of his attacks. There's about 30 different explosive devices that were attributed to him and multiple explosions. No one died, luckily. 17 people have been injured. There really is no connection between Ted Kaczynski Unabomber and Italian Unabomber. A little bit for that name, I don't really know, but someone made a joke and called him Munabomber, which means pussy bomber. Yeah, more or less a vagina bomber, which is just, no one really liked that name, so they just went with Unabomber because of the similarities of like packaging and the way explosions work between Ted Kaczynski and the Italian Unabomber. Guillaume Apollinaire. Some of you might recognize him with this photo. The creator of surrealism. Okay, if you know me, then you know that I do not agree upon that statement. I will say he is within the formation of Cubism and part of the spreading of Cubism more than what became of Surrealism. But sure, he coined the word. Here I am first of all a man full of sense, knowing life and of death, having proved the joys and the sorrows of love, having sometimes known how to impose his ideas, knowing several tongues, being pretty well travelled, having looked at the war from the infantry and the artillery, shot in the head trepanned under ether, having lost his best friend in the frightful fight. I know as much of the old and the new as one man alone could learn. And today, without getting upset at this war, yes, between ourselves, for ourselves, my friend, I judge that long wrangle to be one of tradition and change, of adventure and order. You whose mouth is made of the image of gods, mouth that the order itself be indulgent when you compare to those who has been the perfection of order, us who know everything seek for adventure. We aren't your enemies. We want to give you dominations vast and strange, where the flower's enigma yields to whatever will pick it. There are brand new flares and colors unseen, 1,000 phantomas imponderable. That's a poem by him called The Pretty Redhead. Reading more and seeing when he coined the term surrealism in 1917. If you remember correctly, the stories of Jacques Vachet, as I mentioned it, he started exploring these concepts already in 1916, 1917. I know what you mean. Oh, you can go into more detail on this and this. This is so interesting. No. I have a personal gripe. Mr. Apollinaire, for example, wrote the book called The Exploits of a Young Don Juan and Irene, which is written in 1911. My mother was in her petticoat and I hitched it up past her knees so she could so she could cut her toenails more easily. This gave me a look of her pretty, plump feet, her fine muscular calves and her round, white knees. The sight of my mother's legs had affected my virility as much as my aunt's fondling had done. My mother probably realized this immediately, for she blushed and let down her petticoat. The lady smiled, and Kate began laughing until stopped by disapproving glances from my mother and my aunt. But she tried to excuse her behavior by saying, Bertie laughed too. When I reached that place with the warm sponge, my mother, though, ordered her to hold her tongue. At that very moment, the bathroom door opened, and Elizabeth, my older sister, entered. She was 15 and went to high school. Although my aunt swiftly flung a shirt over my bare body, Elizabeth had time to see me, and that bothered me considerably. For though I was not in the least embarrassed in front of Bertie, I did not want to be stark naked by Elizabeth. This is so retarded. So yes, so yes, he's a pervert. Oh no. I should also point out a very, very funny thing. He was in defense of Dreyfus. Why? Me, the perverted Apollinaire, had to defend Dreyfus. He's not a German spy, everybody. Alright, I gotta move on. I can't take this serious. Nick Land. Now, we're gonna have fun with this guy too. But I want to point out before I really go on and tell you what is so special about him. Nick Land is actually my Umfi. Yes, he's my Twitter Umfi. He did lose access to this account, but he has created a new one. But still, he has been my Umfi. Well, his old account is my Umfi. And the reason for that being the most popular video I made of Maria the Witch. Yeah, it's sad it's so popular, but it is what it is. He followed that entire drama. And whenever I talked about it, because sometimes that story got viral again, I saw him like, oh, here we go again. And it's like, Nick Land, like, it's just like, Nicholas, what the hell? He has been more active as of late, going on different discussions and debates, which is very fascinating. Tucker Carlson even talked about one of his concepts, and I don't understand it. I will not talk about it. If I do a longer video, I might talk about it, but I need to understand it first. I have noticed that he doesn't really understand that people are completely misusing his terminology. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about here. There's a lot to him, but I'm going to talk about one concept in particular. Well, two concepts I really like, I should say. His most popular book, or collection of texts, I should say, is Fanged Noumena. The doctor's face seems to swim in and out of focus. You see the pores on his skin, scrupulous arrays, and then suddenly, without the solve, crossing the threshold, filmy cut, a circle of homogeneous flesh tone, nostril seals against the delusion, eyes shut and switched off forever, lips, teeth, tongue migrating downwards, out of shot, the disc receding at speeds towards a point of disappearance, in the center of the screen, the old reality is closing down, passing through mathematical punctuality. The dot winks out in pixel death. We apologize for the loss of signal. There seems to be a transmission problem. We are unable to restore the home movie. You were 3 years old, wearing a cowboy hat, standing in the paddle pool, Mommy and Daddy smiling proudly, but your parents have been vaporized into a dot pattern. Shapes and colors collapse into digital coding. We have come to the end of the series, and there will be no repeats of Daddy the doctor and Mommy the nurse. There has been a terrorist incident in the film's archive. The Western Civilization show has been discontinued. Hundreds of gigabytes. God Daddy the unit. Death Mommy the zero. Stink of excrement and burned celluloid. You must remember, one scrambling at zero like a dog. It's the primal scene. You were not to play with the switches. Now schizophrenia has adjusted your set. Flies crawls out of the eye socket of black babies breeding the dot patterns. And for your special entertainment, we have turned you into a TV-guided bomb. Daddy is a North American aerospace corporation. Mommy is an air raid shelter. Parts belted in an orgasm. Baby fat burns. Conception. You're minus 9 months and counting. Don't be scared. Take 20 billion years. Universal history is on the screen. Big Bang is to be redesigned. Hydrogen fuses under the arc light. The camera angle can be improved. Outside the studio, schizophrenics drifting green and black. You feel that you've been here before. 11:35 on a beautiful capitalist evening. Runway neon, traffic of sex and marijuana. Your death window is rushing up. Almost time for you to climb into the script. Which, when you're inside, is remembering where you came in. We're afraid it's impossible to take you live to the impact site. This report comes from beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. If you climb out through the electrodes, the oxygen mask will descend automatically. Please extinguish all smoking materials. Deposit syringes in the tray provided. There will be a slight jolt as we cross over. Thank you for flying with transnational commodification. We shall shortly be arriving in Mayhem. If there's anybody on board who can impersonate a pilot, it will be of comfort for the other passengers. To understand what we just read, you have to understand the concept of what he talks about in this sense of accelerationism that is mostly being misunderstood. It is the delusion theory of deterritorialization. Weird concept. But it's the idea that territories, which is a social interaction, social relation between one another, will be altered, mutated, or destroyed. Okay. So, see it as that. Social interaction or relations of social relationships. So, any interaction in society, larger interaction within the body, the nation itself. Right? So a misunderstanding of accelerationism is just taking the deterritorialization and not looking at the other aspect talked about, which is like, oh, I vote for Joe Biden because he's the accelerationist point of view. He brings destruction. He brings destruction of the state body. The body will come into play later. The state body. But that's a misuse of it. And we have other people a little bit more. One of the things that Nick Land had to learn recently, that people are using the word accelerationism in a satanic T-word by thinking like, oh, if I bomb a school or shoot up a school or any of that, that would lead to accelerationism, which will lead to the destruction of society. But that's not what is being stated. It is the changing of social relationships that this does. And then you can talk about the body. This is the solution concept, the body and organs. If you take the organs, which is the inner working of your body, that is what is technically being removed with deterritorialization. The body's internal organs, so internal relationships are being removed by deterritorialization. And that is sort of what you have to bring forth in accelerationism, is the destruction of these social interactions that is slowly happening over time, regardless of what you want it to actually do. This is nothing you can't change. It is slowly killing itself. Atomization, individualism, all this sort of destroying, but it's not replacing anything. And more by organ failure, more or less, that is how the body dies. The body doesn't die by you forcing the body in stress, but it does die with the organs being removed, by these interactions being removed. An interaction can be, as you saw in this poem you just wrote, that kind of explained most of this. It's the social interaction here with the child is him watching a DVD that his father probably made him about his childhood memory. Watching him as playing with his mother and father. And then over time, that DVD breaking just because he overused it. Returning into static, into not a singularity, which is the data collapsing upon itself in a broken state. Then, and that's an organ dying in your body, that's a liver failure. That social interaction is dead and can no longer be replaced. Your childhood is gone. That romantic idea of Western civilization of sorts of your childhood is gone. It died with that DVD burning down. And soon you will have a body without organs. Now, I might have misunderstood some aspects of this, but this is kind of how I view it. Now, these social relations or social interaction can be very minuscule, but it's still part of your the internal organs of your body, of the state, of the nation, of the world, of Western civilization. That's your organs, and they're slowly dying out. And once they die out, they turn into a blob, meaning you die, the body dies, and the body dies. It's no longer about the organs. It will mulch into itself. You put it into the grave, and it will be eaten by larvae, and it will mulch into energy. And then later, in the destruction of the universe, back into a singularity. That is the end goal of entropy. That's the end goal of life itself, if you don't believe in God. But that's the end goal of the materialistic world, returning back to a singularity. The one concept I really like with Nick Land is the concept of an eternal sovereign. Like, Nick talks a lot about the issue of sovereignty. And the issue of a sovereign is that the sovereign dies, meaning it needs to be constant changing happening to fit that sovereign. But what will fix it is an eternal sovereign. And he talks about, well, machine being the sovereign in the future, I guess, in one sense. But isn't the eternal sovereign Jesus Christ of Nazareth? Logos? Think about it.